Hey, what is going on guys? Danny here, and in this video, I wanted to give you guys my thoughts on Intel's new 8th generation Coffeelake processors for the mainstream desktop segment. It only feels like just a few weeks ago, Intel had launched their 7th generation Coffeelake processors, but with AMD coming out and surprising us all, and really giving Intel a run for their money, it was only a matter of time before Intel retaliated. And retaliate they did. We're not even a year later, we're seeing a complete overhaul in the mainstream segment. The major difference with this generation being that Coffeelake is finally bringing higher core count CPUs to this segment, where the three different i3, i5, and i7 series had remained stagnant in terms of core and thread count for basically the last decade. A couple of months ago, I had made a video outlining some things Intel could do to win back some popularity from Ryzen. If you're interested, I'll leave a link to that video in the description down below. But to put it short, I basically said Intel could do three things. Bring higher core count CPUs, which they did, so we can check that one off of our list. Have unlocked multipliers for all their CPUs, which will not be happening unfortunately. And third, have backwards compatibility with older sockets and chipsets, which, well, kind of is a gray area at the moment, but I wouldn't get your hopes up too high about seeing a 6-core part in your older Z170 or Z270 motherboard. So let's get right into it and take a look at this new lineup. So starting from the top, we have the new i7 8700K, which is a 6-core 12-thread CPU with a base frequency of 3.7 GHz and a single-core boost frequency of 4.7 GHz, 12 megabytes of cache with a 95-watt TDP, and will have an RCP of $359 US. After that, we have the locked i7 8700, which will have a lower base and boost frequency of 3.2 GHz and 4.6 GHz respectively, and since it's a locked CPU, it will have a lower TDP of 65 watts and will have an RCP of $303. Moving on, we have a couple of i5s, similarly to the i7. One is unlocked and the other is locked. The 8600K is a 6-core 6-thread part, similar to previous i5s, just being non-hyper-threaded i7s, with a base frequency of 3.6 GHz and a boost of 4.3 GHz, 95-watt TDP, and an RCP of $257, whereas the locked i5 8400 has a base of 2.8 GHz and a boost of 4 GHz. Now the frequencies and the price between the 8400 and the 8600 is quite drastic. So I suspect, just like the previous generation, we'll see an 8500, which will slot right in between the two and kind of bridge that gap. Then next, we have the i3s, which are 4-core 4-thread parts, just like the i5 from the previous generation. First, we have the i3 8350K, that is an unlocked i3, has a base frequency of 4 GHz, 91-watt TDP, and will have an RCP of $168. While the locked i3 8100 will have a base of 3.6 GHz, 65-watt TDP, and an RCP of $117. For some reason, the i3s didn't have specified boost frequencies, which was weird, but I'm sure that'll be cleared up once they're released. Now, something important to take note here is that these pricing figures should be taken with a grain of salt, because I'm 100% sure retailers will have set prices differently. It should be noted that those prices are for lots of 1000 tray processors. Don't expect to see those same prices from any reseller, but I can't imagine them being dramatically marked up either. So there you guys have it, the entire 8th generation lineup so far. I have to say that I'm quite pleased by the way they turned out. In my opinion, this overhaul was much needed, and I also feel like this is what Coffeelake should have been in the first place. There's no doubt in my mind that this is the result of AMD pushing the mainstream with their higher core count CPUs. As you guys know, a lot of people now aren't just using their computer for one thing only. Almost everyone would prefer to have a versatile machine where they can game, be involved in some kind of content creation. Social media platforms such as YouTube and Twitch are growing. A lot of games are now taking advantage of more than 4 cores, so it's nice to be able to finally have some nice options. Another thing that I wanted to point out from their slides was that they claim to have better overclocking with these new 8th generation processors. There were some rumors floating around recently that the i7 8700K was able to hit 4.8 GHz on air without any issues. So that's great if that's true. An 8700K at 5 GHz would have the same single core performance as the 7700K with a similar overclock, which currently on the market is the best gaming CPU, while at the same time would also have multi-threaded performance comparable to an R7 1700, which is an 8-core 16-thread CPU, which is astonishing. The deficit in core count when compared to Ryzen can be made up by Intel due to Coffeelake's higher IPC and clock speeds. Looking at the bottom of the stack from both Team Red and Team Blue, the i3s will seriously give the Ryzen 3s a run for their money because they're now both 4-core 4-thread parts, whereas earlier it was Ryzen's 4-core 4-thread parts going up against the older i3s which were just dual cores. On top of that, you'll have Intel's higher IPC and clock speeds come into play there. Even though the Ryzen 3 can be overclocked, they're not exceeding 4 GHz, whereas the locked i3 8100 will boost to that frequency most likely. And of course we have the 8350K, which will be able to clock much higher since it's unlocked. With the i5s in this generation being 6-core parts, I feel like they'll be taking back the title as best gaming CPU. With many games now demanding more than 4 threads, I felt like the i5s just weren't able to keep up. Being an owner of the 6600K, CPU-intensive games like Battlefield 1 would really bring the i5 to its knees. However, now that should all change. Even though they won't have as many threads as the Ryzen 5 1600 or 1600X, because they're not hyper-threaded, they'll still have that clock speed and IPC advantage, which should be enough for games. Although if you still want to stream, then a Ryzen 5 1600 still looks like the better option. And in the high end, the 8700 and the 8700K challenge the Ryzen 7 processors for the same reasons as mentioned before. The 8700K will offer better gaming performance than the i7 7700K since games are able to take advantage of more than 4 cores, and it will be a lot more capable in terms of streaming, video editing, rendering, encoding, and things like that. The mainstream desktop segment is finally very competitive, where whether it's AMD or Intel, they both offer very compelling and viable choices. Whether you're shopping at the $150 price point or the $350 area, there's something just for everyone here. However, there are some caveats that do come with this launch, some of which may not seem like such a big deal to some people, while others might get completely turned off by the idea of buying a Coffeelake processor. First off, Intel decided to slightly increase the prices of the processors for some reason. The 7700K launched at around $330 to $340, whereas the 8700K will most likely hit store shelves for about $30 to $40 more. Therefore, this overhaul to the lineup isn't a linear innovation step. They're charging a premium for the added cores, which doesn't make sense to me. You ideally want the new parts to slot into the same position as last generation parts at the same price points. This also puts the high-end 8700K in a bizarre spot as they're now starting to step into the lower-end HEDT segment, but obviously without having those HEDT features. Another important thing to note is that Coffeelake CPUs will only launch with the higher-end Z370 chipset motherboards. There won't be any cheaper H360 or H310 motherboards for the locked CPUs. So therefore, if you're buying a locked i3-8100, you may end up paying more for the motherboard than the processor itself. This is where Ryzen has the advantage, because you can save more money on the motherboard by buying a cheaper B350 motherboard and still have the ability to overclock. Speaking of Ryzen, it'll still be the value king in this whole segment here. If you compare the Ryzen 5 1600 to the 8600K, there's much better value or performance per dollar there. The 1600 is cheaper, has 6 more threads, comes with a fairly capable cooler, and doesn't require a more expensive motherboard to overclock. The other thing is that owners of Z170 and Z270 motherboards will most likely not get the chance to upgrade. The 7700K is the end of the line for owners on those older motherboards. It's unfortunate, but I would have loved the idea of being able to drop in a 8700K into my older Z170 motherboard to prolong that system's life further. But it looks like Intel wants to shove another chipset into our faces, while their competitors are willing to allow AM4 to go through 4 different generations of CPUs. But regardless of whatever you choose and whatever appeals to your preferences, it's great that we finally have competition back in the CPU market. There are a lot of viable options out there, and that's great. Whether it's a processor from Team Blue or Team Red, at least we have an option this time around. Basically, before Ryzen launched, the whole market was pretty much painted blue. If you wanted to game, if you wanted good gaming performance, it was either go Intel. If you wanted to stream, do video editing, it was pretty much go Intel. But this time around, it's finally nice to have a lot of more options to work with. This is going to force both Intel and AMD to continue to make better products. Prices will be affected, where all of this is just a win for the consumers. So that pretty much covers my thoughts so far on Coffeelake. I hope you guys found this video to be informative and helpful. Leave your thoughts down below in the comment section. I'm curious what you guys think about Coffeelake. Also, if you're interested in seeing more content like this, then hit that subscribe button. I'd greatly appreciate it. Thank you guys so much for watching, take care, and I'll see you in the next one.